Now, Mr. Michael Wancata, Director of the Austrian Development Bank. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me. Today I have two hats. On the one hand, I talk about the increasing role of development finance institutions and be a representative of the European Development Finance Institutions Association, the EDFIS, which is an institution comprising 15 bilateral institutions. And the second part of my presentation, I will focus a little bit on the Development Bank of Austria, which I am representing as well. The first part of my presentation is also based on a study recently published during the World Bank meeting in Washington this year, a study which has the topic to demonstrate and to outline the increasing role of development finance institutions for global development. This study has been commissioned by two think tanks, one from Europe, from the UK, and the other one from the United States. So it was a joint effort between European and United States institutions to outline that. What our role of all of these institutions working in the private sector is, and our target is to invest in developing countries, to create jobs, to increase the economy, and last but not least, to contribute to reduce poverty. And Mr. Schütte already mentioned these three huge conferences which took place last year. The first one in Addis for financing for development, whereas it's very much on the agenda to finance or to work with the private sector, to invest in countries, to be a driver for productivity and sustainable development and create jobs. The second one is SDG at the United Nations conference, which also paves the way for the next 15 years, how we can reduce poverty. And the last but one in conference in Paris about the climate conference, where this huge total framework for climate financing has been set. And what also has been mentioned by Mr. Schütte is that in all these conferences, the work with the private sector has been very up high on the agenda, and that is something which is relatively new. And recently in the last conference in Busan, it was the first conference for the international development community where this has really stated. And if you look at this graph, we can see that these development goals, these joint efforts have contributed to the reduce of poverty over the last decades. But nevertheless, there's still a lot to be done to reach our target to 2030. And if you look at this declining figure, this is very positive. You look at some countries, you see, for example, in China and India, an increasing role of people with a middle income who can afford more than in the past. And to, I think, further decrease this poverty rate, I think it's very important that a lot of institutions are working together. The World Bank did a survey and asked people what they would need most to reduce and to come out of poverty, and most of them, and the answers of more than 70% of the people asked said that they need jobs. And jobs are more or less created in the private sector, and that is the reason why the role of the private sector is very much high up on the agenda and very important. Or the another point is, if you look at the statistics from the ILO labor, they say that more of 90% of the jobs are created in the private sector as well in lower and middle income countries. So if you look at this global aid architecture, you have different institutions, with different missions and different settings, and there we have the already mentioned bilateral donor agencies, which were heavily working with technical assistance, with government money, with grants, implementing projects directly or via NGOs. Then you have so-called development banks, public sector, as a partners working with, we have, for example, in Germany, KfW, or in France, AFD, Agence Française de Développement, which are only working with the public sector. They have, as an instrument, concessional loans, are working with a lot of technical assistance. And then a third pillar, as we call it, it's the role of development finance institutions, which have a different mandate, only working with the private sector and using different instruments. So in our case, we have, for example, equity investments. We do equity investments. We provide loans, but not on a concessional basis, but on market terms. And we have, to a small extent, some technical assistance available, which is for studies and trainings of our partners. And it's also been mentioned the issue of blending, which came up over the last years. That is the mixture of grants with financing instruments, interest rate subsidies, investment subsidies, first loss guarantees. A lot of different instruments are around here and being discussed. And we at the bilateral development finance institutions at here in Europe, together with IFC, have already agreed to start on working out kind of a rule book to say when institutions working with the private sector should, in which case they could use these blending instruments without crowding out the private sector, crowding out private banks working in specific countries, and also distort the market. This graph is also one out of these study commissioned earlier this year. And it shows that the figures of development finance institutions, their contribution for financing has increased between 2002 and 2014 by roughly 600%, from 10 billion to 70 billion. And over the same period of time, the official development aid only grew by 50%, from roughly 88 billion to 137 billion. And if one extrapolates these graphs, in expectations could be that in 2020 official development aid and the development finance institution will provide the same amount of financing. Then I come to a little bit more specifically to the European Development Finance Institutions, the EDFIs, a group of 15 institutions, and a little later on I will explore a little bit more about these 15 institutions. But what you can see is that within the last decade, we at European Development Finance Institutions tripled our portfolio from roughly 10 billion to 36 billion, which in the end of the day makes also demonstrates a huge relevance of these bilateral development finance institutions here in Europe. And within the ED, we made also a survey and asked the governments here in Europe and looked at their public statements. What have been the reasons for these governments here in Europe to increase the capital for these development finance institutions, to make them available to increase their businesses? And definitely these European DFIs are a government instrument. Most of them are 100% owned by the governments, and they can help the governments to implement their policies. And if you look at these bars, you can see that it is high up on the agenda to contribute to growth in developing countries, to create jobs in developing countries, but also second largest portion the reason has been to help the governments to contribute to reach these development goals. That was one of the other reasons, to provide additional money, but last but not least, the third one, to help these development finance institutions to contribute to the climate change agenda they have. We as European DFIs are not looking at being a commercial viable and commercial sustainable institution, and not only measure our business success, but we also try to measure what we have done, and that's also part of our mission as a development impact. And there we've set a certain rule of indicators we are all measuring, and in 2015 only, these 15 institutions with their new businesses contributed directly and indirectly to the creation of 4 million jobs. And these institutions, these companies and corporates we are working with in developing countries, private companies, private banks, they contributed with 11 billion on taxes paid to their relevant governments, which help the governments to finance by themselves health projects, education projects, and such things. And this also climate change and financing renewable energy projects is a very big topic for us. we have also contributed with our new project to the production of 74,000 gigawatt of energy produced. If I talk a little bit specifically about these European institutions, you see that they are globally active more in all developing countries according to the OECD DAC list. There are some institutions which have a more specific regional focus than others. If you, for example, our French colleagues have, based on tradition, a huge focus on Africa. We as Austrians, based in center of Europe, more related to Eastern Europe, have a stronger focus on doing projects in the Western Balkans or in Eastern Europe or in Central Asia. But we, together with our partners, we are really in all of the developing countries active. Some of our partners are only based here as an institution in Europe, without any offices in the countries. So, and what we also want to try is we want to support micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. As outlined earlier, SMEs are the core drive for growth, and there are, most of the jobs are created there. So we are sometimes working with financial institutions where we have the financial sector very often as partner, because these banks or funds we are investing in know their local partners much better than we could to analyze their business and the viability to be repay loans than these local institutions which have their local presence. As in DFI, we have, and before we ourselves involved in project, we want to look at more or less 3 criteria. We want to be additional, we want to have a catalytic effect, and we want to have that the project are sustainable. That means it'll be additional. We, as already said, we don't want to crowd out other players, local players in the market. We want to, the businesses, if local banks can do it. So we want to bring additional benefit to that country, so we go in countries where others don't go. And we want to have a catalytic effect, which means we can demonstrate that we can do business in high-risk countries where other institutions are not going for. So we are very often front-runner and door opener for businesses in difficult countries via direct investments, also maybe to fund investments. And last but not least, each and every of our projects has to be sustainable in the sense that it has to be commercially sustainable. We are financial institutions, we are investment companies, we want to get our money back, and we want to get it back at least with a certain margin of profitability. And we're not only looking at the profitability in each and every project, and that makes it a little bit different between us and financial institutions, commercial banks. We're also looking at international standards to be fulfilled in our projects. That means all of our projects and project partners have to adhere to international environmental and social standards. We have here within the ETFIs these ETFI harmonized standards, basically working with the international standards established by the IFC, the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, and that is something which is a must in each and every project that we have to look at, and these project partners have to adhere to that. So I have here on this slide the ETFI vision. Most of the things which are here in this ETFI mission statements I already mentioned: working with the private sector, contribute to growth in developing countries, reduce poverty, and go into markets where others don't go, have I so far mentioned by me. And now a little bit more specific about the ETFIs. We are, as already said, an association comprising 15 institutions from the north to the south, from Scandinavia to Portugal and Italy. These institutions are different in size, different in terms of operations. The oldest one, our British colleagues from CDC, have started their business in 1948. We as OeEB are, I think, one of the youngest institutions, started 8 years ago. And if you can look at even of the names of the institutions, you can also, to a certain extent, see that they have different instruments sometimes available. The Scandinavians have this term fund in their business names, so they are more investment vehicles, investing a lot in private equity funds. Some of these institutions have a banking license, others have not. The French colleagues, Probaco has a banking license, our FMO has a banking license. We have a banking license tailor-made to that activity, what we are doing. These institutions have different instruments. Some of them are doing a lot of debt business, some of them are doing more equity business. But what unites us is having the same mandate, working with the private sector, and to help to the companies and our partners to grow. This ETFI organization is based in Brussels. In overall, there are, with all these 15 institutions, 1,800 employees. Our partners have in total 40 local offices in developing countries, and I think that is something which is helpful because of a lot of projects which are larger in terms of investments. Risk sharing is a very relevant topic, so we are very often working together, and therefore we have also established some task forces and working groups where the people working in the same area coming together, join information, is kind of a learning platform. We also did a lot of harmonization work, especially for environmental and social risk analysis, where our partners get some templates to be filled in to monitor the projects, and it helps us to be a valuable partner for our clients in the developing countries that they don't get also from different institutions, different requirements. We recently set up also an ETFI management company, which is quite new. This ETFI management company is dealing with the European Commission. We have been for some years now in discussion with the European Commission. We has also an interest that more projects in the private sector are realized, and this ETFI management company is now handling two funds from the European Commission. One is one fund which provides more first loss guarantee for projects in risky countries, and the second one is a program which is called Electrify, and this program is part of a technical assistance facility, part of a risk-sharing facility and financing facility, where rural electrification projects, decentralized electrification projects should be financed. And last but not least, we have two joint financing vehicles. One is called EFP, European Financing Partners, where we jointly finance projects in ACP, Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. And the second one is called ICCF, Intact Climate Change Facility, where we jointly finance with the ETFIs, with the European Investment Bank and the French Development Bank, climate relevant projects in developing countries. So far, the first part of my presentation, and now I will move to the Austrian portion, the Development Bank of Austria I am representing. OeEB is one of the youngest ETFI members. It has been set up in 2008, and over the years we managed to build up a portfolio. At the end of 2015, a little bit less than $1 billion, currently 1.1 billion. So we're a growing institution. We can do more businesses each and every year because of the support we have from the government, and we're working on behalf of the Austrian government, especially the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That's a principle for us. We also managed to get a rating from Standard & Poor's, which helps sometimes for our refinancing activities, which is the same rating as the Austrian government has. So you can see that we grow our portfolio each and every year. The green portion of the bar is our debt business, our loan business, which is the major activities. We are financing, providing long-term loans to investments in developing countries. And in 2012, we started with equity investments. The funding for the debt portion is being via our shareholder on the capital market, and the equity investments, there we get money from the Ministry of Finance, and we act as a trustee for the Ministry of Finance in investing in as a shareholder in projects directly and also in private equity funds. As I said, each and every DFI has its strategic priorities and regional outreach. In the mind, we agreed with our shareholder and the Ministry of Finance to focus ourselves very much on 3 areas. One hand, working with the micro, small and medium-sized enterprises to do businesses in resource efficiency project, basically energy efficiency project, and the third portion is doing projects in renewable energies. And the target is to have at least 55% of our portfolio in this green bar. And it's not only metrics with sectors, but also with countries. And we want to do a lot of our business Africa, Southeast Europe, Central Asia, and South Balkans, and Western Balkans, South Caucasus, and a little bit in Latin America. That is a little bit referred to the policy coherence in Austria, because the Austrian Development Corporation has done more business in the Western Balkans and moving now to South Caucasus. They had some activities in Latin America, and the strategy of the Ministry of Finance, working with international finance institutions, is more or less covering the same regions where we are going to with our main focus. But we are also doing business outside these areas if they are related to these priority topics, and if there are Austrian companies involved. And we agreed with our government that we should do a number of projects with the Austrian investors, but basically from our mandate, we are untied. As not surprisingly, all these projects have to be in developing countries. They have to be commercially sustainable. We have to demonstrate positive development effects. So we have set up also internally results framework where we measure our strategic goals and the development goals we want to reach. And definitely all of our projects have to fulfill international best practice with respect to environmental and social standards. It has also been mentioned that within the development cooperation, the trend of untying is now around for a number of years. And when we have been set up as OeEB, our mandate is completely untied. We don't need any Austrian investor or exporter involved in our project. Nevertheless, since some of the ministries are sitting in committees for approval of project, and the Austrian Chamber of Commerce is sitting there, we have been agreed that we should try to have at least 30% directly or indirectly involvement of Austrian companies in our project. And for example, we have a hydropower plant in the Western Balkans with an Austrian investor, and we provided the debt side of the financing. We have a number of Austrian consultants involved in our project. We have already financed the infrastructure project in Mexico, which is the expansion of a port. And there's one large company called Leap here who is providing, it is the market leader in providing cranes for ports. So we have financed the investor for the port, but he supplied cranes from Austria. So as we do long-term loans, equity and technical assistance. Long-term loans, we talk about our facility per project in a range between 10 to 25 million. On the equity side, between 3 to 6 million per transaction. And the technical assistance, we talk about projects in a range between 20,000 and to 70,000. And so I'm coming basically to my end of the presentation. I think as a DFI, you're a partner for the government to support them to implement their policy goals. Austria has committed itself to, at the climate finance side, to at least finance 100 million per year in terms of climate finance. And we as OeEB help the Ministry of Environment to at least contribute 50% of that, what they should target, because we have a huge portion of renewable energy projects in our portfolio and new renewable energy projects. We're financing wind, solar power, hydro, geothermal project, and that is really helping policy support for the Austrian Ministry of Environment. The Austrian Chancellery is the relevant institution also to implement sustainable development goals. With our activities, we also support the government in that respect to reach that. And I think the DFI And the Austrian companies, and maybe the same would go for Czech companies, can benefit from an DFI because we can partly be co-investor in projects as shareholder. We can finance the debt side of an investment of an Austrian or Czech company, for example. As I said, we have a lot of consultants from our side involved in the project, which help them to internationalize their business. And last but not least, I think it's different being a shareholder as a DFI in a project. It's more than a political risk guarantee because you have much more visibility. You really have a kind of an umbrella function for the co-shareholder or co-investor, and because it helps, I think, against local political interference. And last but not least, I think would benefit also from this asset management company, the access to EU funds more directly than we wouldn't have otherwise. So thank you very much, and
thank you. Thank you very much. A very interesting presentation again, and indeed, Mr. Wancata, it was a tour de force, if you will. Very good concrete examples of what can be done and what is being done. In fact, I'm sure you all have, or at least some of you have, questions, so I'll just remind you, Mr. Wancata, as well as the others on this panel will be available to answer those, your comments, whatever, be it at the end of this conference or in particular from 12 o'clock onwards.